And welcome everyone. Welcome to the Minnesota Association of Library Friends webinar, last webinar of 2020. I'm Sue Grove, Vice President of Programming for MALF, Minnesota Association of Library Friends. You won't see much of me, but towards the end of our time together this afternoon, I'll step back into the frame and take a few minutes and recap MALF's programming year in review. And there are several webinars and other online events that you can go back and revisit after today, when I'm sure you're going to leave energized and eager for more and more. So before I give the floor to Kim, let me outline what you can expect today. After the keynote presentation, Ann Hutton, my intrepid colleague on the MALF board, will moderate the audience question and answer period with our expert. Several of you have already offered up wonderful questions, so we'll start with a few of those. And as you're listening, be sure to drop your questions into the chat function, so whenever they happen to occur to you, and then Ann will monitor those. We'll ask you to stay muted during Kim's presentation and the question and answer to streamline things and minimize the risk of background noises. Rest assured, though, we can mute you on our end, should you forget. Finally, we'll turn the tables a bit and invite you to apply what you've learned, and we'll apply it to your own friends group and community. We're going to break out into small groups of about 6 people each, and don't worry about the mechanics. David, our tech manager, will automatically assign you to a breakout room, and then we'll pull us back into the space at the end. So heads up in advance. There will be a prompt, so you'll know when to go into breakout. And the prompt is, what's the best idea you've heard today, and how might you apply it to or adapt it to your own community setting? And a member of MALF's own board will be in each breakout room. They'll be your primary note taker, and they'll play point when reporting back, unless, of course, somebody else in the conversation wishes to do those honors. So now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our session leader for today. Kim Horton is Senior Director of Communications at the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Horton built brands in the corporate world for years before deciding to use her powers for good in the nonprofit sector. As an independent strategist, she crafted communications for an array of Minnesota-based nonprofits and cultural institutions, including Literacy Minnesota and the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. She pivoted to Friends and Foundation work 4 years ago. In addition to her work with and on behalf of the St. Paul Public Library, Horton is a staff consultant for Library Strategies Consulting Group. In that capacity, she has led branding and messaging campaigns for library entities in such places as Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Louisville, Kentucky, just to name 2. Her trainings have also benefited dozens of smaller libraries, particularly in Minnesota and North Dakota. This fall, Horton spearheaded an innovative grassroots public awareness campaign to benefit the St. Paul Public Library. It included the distribution of more than 1,000 Friends branded yard signs all across the 7 wards of St. Paul. Horton will share some of these examples and talk about building a foundation for communications in this uncertain time. Kim, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to see faces. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to see anyone, and this is fantastic. Although I wish I was seeing you in person, I have to say, I'm going to take 1 minute and share my screen really quick so we can get that happening. All right, are we good there? Wonderful. All right. So here we are. Thank you, Sue, and thank you all for having me today. I realize that there are so many Zoom opportunities now, and Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. So the fact that you are voluntarily spending your time with me today is really, really an honor. So thank you for that. So I want to talk about communications, kind of all things communications today. And, you know, typically at the end of a year, this is a really good time to start thinking about, okay, what does that year ahead look like? Getting excited to all of the possibilities and thinking about how we're going to have new relationships with our constituents and what kinds of exciting things we're going to do. This year's a little different, obviously. And so looking ahead to next year is still uncertain, frankly. We know that COVID's gonna dictate things for a little bit longer. Maybe towards the end of the year, we'll get back to somewhat of a normal scheme of things, but we just don't know. And so how do we know what to talk to people about when we're just not sure what life is gonna be like? So I want to talk a little bit about that today, and just kind of start off by saying that this is a great time to make sure that your foundation is in order and really looking at the basics of communication. If getting that straight will help you not only during COVID, but long after that's passed us. So today, we're going to talk about what that looks like. What is a foundation, a strong foundation for communications? What are those basics that we should all have in order, getting our house in order, if you will? We'll talk a little bit about types of content that you can share with people. What are the kinds of things that we should be talking to our constituents about? And then how do we share those? What does a plan look like for ongoing communications? And what are some of the channels that we can use to talk to people? There are infinite possibilities, and spoiler alert, you don't have to do them all. So that's the basics of what you're going to hear from me today. And then obviously, like we heard, they'll have lots of time for questions. So please think of those things. If I don't cover it today, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So first and foremost, let's talk about what does a foundation for communications look like? So I like to say this is telling your story, and we're all library people. We love stories, right? We get that language. So how are you telling your story? You got to make the case. You got to tell supporters why they should care about you. You got to have clear messaging. You got to make sure you're saying the same thing the same way. And then make sure you're sharing it consistently, time and time again. So to spend a little bit of time on when I say make your case, I want you to think about the why of your organization. Why do we all exist? And it's easy to say, well, we exist to support the library, but that's not your why, that's your what. We do support the library, certainly, but why is that important? Why should people care about supporting the library? Well, another answer, and we've gone back and forth about this in our organization as we were creating our strategic foundation for communications and our strategic planning, frankly, and thought, well, because reading, because books, because community, and all of those things are important too. And yes, all of those things are important, but that's still not our why. That's the library's why. The library exists for all of those reasons, but why the Friends? Why do we support the library? And really what it came down to for us is that the library is our why. We exist because we believe in the library. We believe that the library is the best place to get all of those things, the books, the reading, the community, and all of the other things that we know and love about the library. But as you probably all experience, there's a whole lot of people that still don't understand why libraries are important today. A whole lot of people do, but there's people who don't understand exactly what is happening in a library. It's not just books. There's homework help happening, and there's digital literacy, and there's job resources, and there's all kinds of other things that are building community that people don't understand. And so I think it's important to not only make the case for the Friends when in our communications, but sometimes we have to step back and make the case for the library too. So I'm going to share with you some of the communications that we've created for our Friends group that help us tell that consistent story about why we exist and why people should care. So this is our, well, a smaller version. I don't like to put all the words on the PowerPoint, but a smaller version of our case for the library. We really believe that with a strong library at the center of a community, that's when people can thrive. And most of you are probably familiar with Eric Kleinenberg and his book, Palaces for the People, where he talks about libraries as this critical social infrastructure that really keep our communities together and keep them strong. I lean on his words a lot when we're making the case for why the library is important. And at the end of it all, that last sentence is what I lean on the most in my communications. Libraries are essential. And that's what we believe as a Friends group. And that's why we exist as a Friends group, because of that belief in the library. And it seems obvious as we go through this, but it's super important to be able to articulate this to people. Again, especially in this crowded space, especially at the end of the year, especially during COVID, when people are asking, who should I support and why? And thinking there are so many organizations that deserve our time and attention right now. And here's why the library is one of them. And we'll get into specific COVID communications in a bit. But this is our why now and long after COVID. So we use that belief as the start of what we call our strategic foundation. And so this is really our mission and our vision. We start with, we believe libraries are essential. And so what we do as a Friends group is that we act as a catalyst for them so that the libraries can strengthen and inspire their communities. And we hope that with that work, that eventually we can see a dynamic library at the heart of every community. And this really takes into our account, our Friends group does consulting work, as you probably know. And so this is our vision that we say, you know, our core work is for St. Paul, but we really do hope that across our country that we can see libraries that are strong and keeping communities strong in every community. So this forms the basis for our communications. Now, we don't always talk like this. We don't always use the words, you know, from our mission statement. People don't always say, we are a catalyst for libraries. You know, people say, well, what does that mean? But it's important to have that foundation in place before you go forward. I like to shorten it. I've shortened it. I use this messaging. We believe in the library. We invest in the library. I use this in a lot of our communications, whether it's a brochure, you'll see it on our website. We incorporate the believe and invest language in our donor appeals. I like to convey passion, and the belief says that. And I like the word invest because it implies that you're not only putting something in, but you're getting something out. And it doesn't have to be money. You can invest time, you can invest talent and things like that. So having some language that you like to use already stated makes it that much easier when you're going to create your communications. So because we're not riding in elevators with people right now, I'm not calling this an elevator pitch. I'm going to call it a quick pitch. So, but it's the same idea. And again, this is maybe it's language that you can put more in your words. So instead of that lofty mission statement type language, this is answering, okay, what's that case for the Friends now? We get that you believe in the library, but then what does the Friends do? And why is the Friends important? And I've put it in this format, the challenge, the solution, and the result, because I find it's kind of like a story arc. Again, to go back to that story analogy, this is the, you know, once upon a time, there was this lovely place called a library that we believe in, but, you know, then we're met with a challenge. Public funding just isn't enough to do what we want it to do, what our residents have said that we want libraries to do. So then, dun, 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 along comes your hero, the Friends. We come in and we invest in the library. We use advocacy, we use programming, and fundraising, of course, and that's how we support our library. And then the result, of course, happy ending. The library is able to meet the needs of its residents in lots of ways. So again, I can get kind of corny about this, but people understand things through stories. And so the more you can think about what you do and answering the question of what you do in those story formats, the more people are going to understand it. So again, not to read through all of those, but the more concrete examples you can give people, like we make story times in multiple languages possible. We make homework help possible, those kinds of things. We have had a lot of questions. We have a pretty big board and we get a lot of questions from our board. Help me tell the story of the Friends. You know, what do we really do? And this is one of those, you know, one sheets, I guess, that's really nice to have for people who are going to advocate on your behalf. And they can put it in their own words and they can use their own stories. But again, having that foundation is what is going to help people really, really understand things. So this, you don't need to read this. I'll just preface that. What I do want you to just see here is that I created a messaging guide. So the slides that I just showed you with our strategic foundation and our quick pitch and this consistent messaging, it's all part of what I call a brand guide. And it's a book. yeah, it's a book, it's got pages, it's fun. For me, one of the most important things you can do is to have everybody in your organization telling the same story, as I said. And so writing it down, it doesn't have to be fancy like a book. It can be one sheet, but actually writing down the way you want to talk about your organization is going to make it clear to everyone. Everyone, even if you don't have communications or marketing in your title, you are all marketing your organization all the time. Every time you talk about the Friends, every time you talk about the library, you are creating an impression for people who might either use it or support it or somehow be connected with you. It's all of our jobs to try and create that same impression. That's really what a brand is. I mean, we use that jargon all the time. You hear branding and what is a brand? It's really the impression that lives in the minds of consumers. It's what you think of something, and we can create that impression. And so if we start from the same place, then we're going to create that same impression and the one that we want. So this guide right here, and again, don't bother reading it. We have different aspects of our work that we talk about in different ways. And so I've written down here, if it's advocacy or if it's our, big fundraiser or if it's our consulting group, here's how you talk about it depending on who the audience is. And so this just gives everyone on staff gets this messaging. And so if they need, if they're writing something to a donor about our fundraiser, here's the language that you can use. Or if you're writing to a legislator about our advocacy work, here's the language you can use. So again, it can be big or small, but write it down. That is my pitch to all of you. So when you have your messaging, you've got your core language ready to go. This is also a really good time to think about, okay, where does that exist out there, for people to see? So is it your website? So this is the time to make sure you will see the language that I showed you before is on our website right now. That quick pitch. I mean, we say on our website, public funding isn't enough. That's where the Friends comes in. So use this language everywhere that you can. If you have a social media presence, you can use a shortened version of, your mission statement or your key messages. This is the time to kind of think about, where does our organization exist online or in front of people somehow? It could be brochures. And can we make our messaging all match? I would also just note that it's a good time to update your website generally. Website platforms now don't have to be expensive. And things they'll be mobile friendly if you start with a new platform. And especially for younger donors right now, people are doing things on their phone. It's super, super important to have that mobile friendly experience and a big fat donate button right where they can see it. So I would also advocate that this is a time to get those kind of things in order and see who who can help you if you have questions about it. Someone in your network knows how to do these kinds of things. So let's talk a little bit about the case during COVID. Your why as an organization doesn't change right now, but it does get stronger, and it does require a little bit more articulation because the nature of the library has changed right now. Our service models have changed drastically right now. And so people need to understand why it's still important to support the library. So I crafted this at the beginning of COVID as language that we can use to help our donors, to help our board, and to help supporters in general understand why it's so important. And again, it's in that same format that we talked about before. We start with the fact that libraries are essential, and they're still essential. Right now, it's even greater than ever. And we've seen that people are coming to the library for credible resources. They're coming to the library for connection through story times and programming. They're coming to the library for more help with their homework and more help with resources. And so it is critical right now that we are able to offer them the resources that they need. But when the doors are closed, things look different, and the library has to reinvent itself. And libraries, we have done, not we, I won't say that, our libraries in our state have done an incredible job of adapting to this new world and to get people the things that they're looking for. And that's how we come together. And they can only adapt if the Friends step in and continue their support. So again, it's the same why. We still believe in libraries, but it's important to let people know how it's changed right now and that their support is still critical. So one of the things I would advocate for is that at every chance you get, at every communication point with donors, with supporters, whether it's in an appeal letter or a newsletter or on social media, let people know what is happening with the library right now. I think that's the thing we get the most questions about. Even over the summer, our board members would say, well, but what are they offering right now? How isn't it closed? And so are they still working? Is everyone working from home? People really just didn't know. They didn't understand that it took just as many people to open the library for limited pickup or contactless pickup because of all the different steps they had to go through for health and safety. So those are the things that we can do as friends to support our libraries, to say, no, really, things are still happening there. Here's what that looks like, and here's what's in place to continue to help you. So you've got messaging in order, but what about sharing things with people? How do you talk to people on an ongoing basis? You know, the foundation that I talked about before is really what grounds you and what goes on your website or on your brochures, things like that. But what are those kind of things that if you choose to start having a relationship with your constituents, what does that look like? And when I say relationship, that's really what I mean. You know, ideally, this is a back and forth with people, and it's understanding what they want to hear from us. In addition to us just putting out things that we think people would be excited to hear. And the most important relationship that we have is, frankly, with our libraries. And again, it sounds like an obvious statement, but it's worth dwelling on here for a minute because it's easy, particularly, I don't know how you're set up, but I'm not in a library. Well, I'm at home right now, right? But typically our office is separate from the library. So we don't always have a day-to-day connection with people. And so it's easy to get off on your own track saying, well, we're going to do this or we're going to do this. But it's most important that the library, as our biggest constituent, is a part of what we're doing, and that we ask them, what are your priorities for us to communicate this year? What programs do you have? What plans do you have that we could help amplify? And so really that can look different for all organizations. I used to have our library, St. Paul, is currently without a communications person. We were hiring for that. But when they had one, she and I would meet monthly. We would talk about priorities coming up for the month ahead, for the year ahead, so that my communications were informed by the library's priorities. This summer, when they were without a communications person, I worked closely with the library director. And some of the things that she was prioritizing this year, I mean, she had 3 pillars that were really her driving force, you know, education, digital literacy, and social connection. And so those things, because that's what the library was really focusing on, those things became our priority too. So as friends groups, when we decided, you know, what kind of content to share, we shared content that amplified those different services. So it's super important to keep the library in mind as you're preparing any kind of programs and any kind of content. When we have a new initiative at our organization, we'll sit down, we'll have a kickoff meeting, and we'll go through the details of that initiative. And one of the questions we always ask, and it's on our sheet that we've printed out, is what is the connection here with SPPL, St. Paul Public Library? How are they involved? Who is going to be involved at every step of the way from the very beginning of the project? That relationship, if that relationship is strong between the friends and the library, again, it's the idea of consistent messaging. Our supporters are going to understand what we're trying to do, and we're going to make the case for support that much better. So, all right, you got your library. Who are your other stakeholders? And this is really up to you. I think we have a tendency sometimes in communications and marketing to just say, well, everybody should care about us. Let's talk to everyone. That's not always going to happen, right? So we just have to pick. We have to pick who we're going to talk to, and then develop a plan for talking to those people. So you probably have a group of current supporters. So that is super important to identify and think about what's your plan for ongoing communication. But maybe you're also thinking, well, you know what, we'd like to bring younger individuals into our fold, or, you know, we've been thinking about reaching out to the local businesses in our community and seeing how they can partner with us for support. This is the time to identify who those potential partners are for next year, and then we strategize the ways to actually connect with all of them. Ideally, you would also ask them what they want in terms of content. So if you can do a survey of your existing audience, or if you can do research on younger audiences and, you know, where they are right now, whether it's social media or what kinds of organizations they're supporting, ideally we're going to be informed, and our content is going to be informed by our audience rather than the other way around. I do realize that's easier said than done sometimes, but that's the goal. So when we're thinking about what to share with those people, obviously we've got library content first and foremost. So if there are things, and now you've talked to your library connection, whoever that is, what programs are coming up for them? What initiatives do they have going on? What services are they offering? This is easy. I say easy in quotations a little bit, but this is easy content to start planning. You know, once a week, maybe you pick Mondays, and you just say, Monday is my library content day, and I'm going to share what's going on with our library. And I'm making that up. It could really be anything, and we'll get to planning in a minute. But using library content is one thing that you can share with people all the time. And then again, back to our stories. If you can find people who have had a good experience with the library and it has somehow benefited them, that is the gold, right? That is the evidence of all of the messaging that we are saying. When I talk about why libraries are essential, having someone to say they have been essential in my life and here's why, that is really what's going to resonate with our audiences. So this is also a challenge that I will acknowledge. Every year, one of the beautiful things about our libraries are that they value privacy, right? So you don't always capture data. So I can't just say, I'm gonna mine all of the names of people who have used the library this week and see who wants to talk to me about their story. So we gotta get a little creative. This is again where having that library connection is so helpful, because you can talk to library staff or your communications person or the director about the people that they know, that they see on a daily basis, or weekly, or whatever it is, who are having success somehow with the library. Another thing that we've done is on our response cards for our donor appeals, when people send back in a check, we've got a spot on that card that says, tell us why you love your library, or tell us why you're a friend. Just giving people places to tell their story. You'll get a lot of lovely responses, and at the very least you get pretty good quotes you can use. I have also contacted a number of those people just by phone and said, hey, thanks for sharing. Would you be willing to tell me a little bit about your story? So it takes some legwork, but the more that you can illustrate the impact of your work and the library's work, the more your supporters are going to resonate with that. And then, of course, you've got whatever initiatives that you have going on, whether it's a program or a big event or a different campaign. These are the things that you can obviously share with people as well. It's a tricky time for programs, as we all know, but your programs don't have to be fancy either. We're doing a series of, they used to be Breakfast with Beth. Our president is named Beth. And so we just offered Zoom calls for whomever wanted to join, that just said, come join us, hear kind of a state of the state from our president, ask questions about what your support does, ask questions about what's happening with the library right now. And it was a really casual 1-hour format, free to attend, easy to do. for supporters. And so we don't have huge turnouts for those, but they've been ongoing. There's one today, I think there's 12 people registered, but those people become really engaged with us. And it's just, it furthers our ongoing relationship. So there are ways to do programs right now, even if you're not doing some huge put together event. And the other thing I'll highlight that was mentioned at the beginning of this was our public awareness campaign that we did just this fall. And you'll see this picture on the screen right now, that I'm a friend of the library, is from that. Those were the lawn signs that we gave out. One of the things, when we started off 2020, like everyone else, we had different dreams. And it was our 75th anniversary this year. So we thought, great, let's talk about our 75th anniversary and let's celebrate and let's get everybody really, really aware of the Friends. And so we came up with all kinds of different ideas, and we came up with a campaign that we thought was fantastic, that was going to try and get everybody in the city reading together on the same day at places all across the city. We loved it. Hopefully someday it'll still be a thing, because it wasn't this year. But we turned that into a different kind of campaign, knowing that it was going to be a really, really difficult budget year for everyone. But for our city and for our libraries, we decided to do a campaign that would not only help people recognize the Friends, but help them recognize that they have a voice in the budget, and frankly, put some pressure on our city council members to remember the library as they're budgeting. So we distributed lawn signs for people throughout the city, and we also asked them to sign a petition. And the petition was saying that, I believe in the library and I support library funding because libraries are the center of our community. And it was, we would consider it a success, I think. And so being able to share those kinds of things really gave people a different way to engage with the Friends. We've had a lot of programs, author programs and things like that. And we have a really good connection with those people and a good following. But there was engagement with this that we hadn't seen. And what it told us is that people were really looking for, frankly, first of all, a different way to connect and an action that they could take. People are hungry right now, and I'm not sure if you've all seen the same thing. People are hungry for something to do, ways to help. Everyone's sitting inside and feeling disconnected, and they want organizations to succeed. They want our communities to do better. And this was a way for them to sign a petition, to lend their voice, to put up a sign that says, yes, I support this, and know that they were doing good. So I encourage you to just think about ways that you might not have tried yet to have people say they're a friend of the library. We purposely kept this lawn sign very evergreen, as we like to call it. We could use it whenever. We knew that this was an election year and that there's going to be a million lawn signs everywhere, but that they were, there's some not so great messaging out there too. So we didn't want to create something that was that felt adversarial. We wanted to create something that people felt pride in. And but that got the word out to people, then yeah, I'm a friend. So the other thing that this allowed us to do was to capture contact information. People signed the petition and then gave their email address, and so that was one of the ways that we were able to keep in touch with people. And it's another example of really keeping your content timely. As I said at the beginning of the year, we had a whole idea for a campaign that we thought would be lovely, and then COVID hit, and then George Floyd was murdered. And so everything that we kept reinventing this thing, but it never made sense. And so instead of going ahead with something that frankly would end up feeling very tone deaf in a really challenging time right now, we said, okay, we're gonna scrap our plans and we're gonna move to something else. And I think that's one of the key learnings right now that we all have to keep in mind too, is things are changing all the time. So if you have an e-news letter that's scheduled to go out and it's happy and lovely, and then there's another tragedy, maybe don't send the e-news that day. You really have to, again, it sounds obvious, but we have to always examine everything we're saying and make sure that it's recognizing the tone of the moment. how do we meet this moment right now? And sometimes that involves scrapping your ideas and moving on, as hard as that is. So thinking about content, thinking about messaging, none of it makes any difference if you don't have a plan for how to use it. So this is the time to talk about planning, obviously. And I want to stress, I mentioned this at the very beginning, but you don't have to do it all. And I want to say that I have been a consultant for a number of years, and I understand this more now than ever as someone working in the friends world and the nonprofit world. On the inside, we just simply don't have the capacity to do everything. And our models right now are these huge organizations that are, you know, all over all the social media. They are up to the minute in their messaging. They've got a beautiful website. They've got videos galore. We don't have to be all of those things. And I'm here to tell you that that's okay. You can still get your message across to your supporters and to the people that are going to care, even if you are not on every social media platform. That's okay. So first and foremost, give yourself some grace. Those are my 2 words this year, are patience and grace. You can ask my husband how well I've been doing at practicing them, but nevertheless, those are the guiding words. So before you're going to communicate with anybody, think about, as I mentioned a moment ago, we got to have a way to contact them, right? So you probably have some sort of existing database of people you know, however you've got that. So how do you get more people there? So you could have them register for an event. Zoom has been great for that, frankly. We, you know, have to register. You have to put in your email address, and then lo and behold, we've got a list of emails of people who have been interested in something that we've been working on afterwards. And so that's a perfect way to start communicating with people. It could be that, like I said, signing a petition. Also, now we have interested supporters, and we know that those people might be potential advocacy committee members for us someday. So that's another way we can talk to people. You can ask people to sign up for your e-news list on your website or via social media. But that's got to be the first thing you think about, is how are we getting people's information? And thinking about the channels, this kind of goes to the channels as well. Just because you have a Facebook presence or just because you have a website doesn't mean people know about it. And so you have to use the communication methods that you have already to say, hey, here's another place that we are. You know, in your direct mail appeal, if you are sending letters to people, you can say, hey, we've got a Facebook page, come follow us. And give them a reason too. I mean, ideally, people aren't going to follow you just to follow you. But if you say, here's what you can expect to hear from us on Facebook, or here's a survey, or here's an incentive, things like that. Giveaways work really well too. We've done book giveaways, and people sign up for that. That's another way to include their contact information. But you got to tell people where you want them to be. Again, whether it's e-news or social. So thinking about social for a moment, and I just want to be mindful of our time so we get good questions. And there's all kinds of different theories out there about social. Facebook works just fine. That's probably our primary channel. And I would say, if you're going to be on social, one is fine. Do what you have the capacity to do. I would rather be on one channel and do it pretty well than have a presence on 5 of them and you're never really there. And people start to learn to tune you out then. So if you're gonna be on one, think about how much time you have to create content. You know, there's of course people who are posting multiple times a day, at least once a day on Facebook. I would say you got to post at least once a week to try and get those algorithms to even share your content. But that's still a pretty good spot to be. Younger people aren't as much on Facebook anymore. They're gravitating more to Instagram and things like that. But again, if you don't have the time to do multiple ones and you don't have the content to share, Instagram is much more image heavy, then that can be tricky too. So think about what you have the time and the capacity to do. And then create a communications plan. Oh, I will just share, e-news has been a big thing for us. We do it a couple times a month. So it's not a huge lift. It's a way to manage and capture email addresses there. We can say, hey, on Facebook, sign up for our e-news, or tell people at our programs, sign up for our e-newsletter. And it's a way to manage those relationships. So I like it. The time commitment isn't huge, but it's still there, and you got to have content to share. But I do like that way of communicating with people. And then obviously, we have direct mail as well. We do a print piece that we send to donors once or twice a year because it's expensive and it's time consuming, but we like to have one way of communicating with them that's not asking them for money. So we do an update and tell them what's going on with us throughout the year. So there's lots of different ways. But again, when you're planning it out, think about, what do you have capacity for? What do you have budget for? I would rather do something well than kind of halfway, especially when we're thinking about relationships. Nobody wants to start a relationship and then be ghosted, as the kids are saying these days. So how do you keep that communication up with people? So I want to just share with you one more thing. This is half of, anyways, a template for a communications plan. It's not super fancy. It's an Excel spreadsheet. But what I like about this is that at the top, I state our goal, and this is an organizational goal. So what are we really trying to do this year? I think this past year, one of our goals was to deepen our engagement and find new ways to engage with our current supporters. And I had a separate goal for new supporters as well. And then, then you name your audience. So that audience would be current supporters, or maybe it's, like we said, maybe it's businesses, maybe it's individuals of a different demographic. And then I came up with messaging. What was our general annual messaging? This year, this past year, for our anniversary year, our message was one of gratitude, first and foremost. So by stating, gratitude here, that was a reminder to me in everything we do, express gratitude. How can we express gratitude to our constituents? Another message was that the library was about people. And so we thought about all the ways that we could show that the library is not about services, it's really about the people. So having your messages here really, again, grounds you. I also did themes, whether it's connecting people or people who have made a difference, things like that. Again, it's just getting more specific to inform what you're doing. And then along the side, events, in-library promotion, email, direct mail. These are just all the ways that you can communicate with people, and you might have more or less, but by putting them, right there on the side and then having your whole year ahead of you, obviously I'm only showing you a little bit of it, you can start to say, well, what are we doing for an event in January? What are we going to do emails this month, or are we going to do a mailing? Maybe our mailing is in March. We have an event in April. And what you start to see is how the arc of your communications looks through the year. It starts to tell you, wow, we have a lot of stuff going on in March and we have nothing going on in July. How can we spread that out a little bit? And it starts to tell you how people are hearing from you. All these things along the side, if you think about it, it's all the ways that I'm communicating with a constituent. And so the more you can think from their perspective of how am I hearing from the friends, the better off you'll be. So anyway, I could go into that forever, but this has been a tool that really helps me start to see the year. And I think it's something that you can even do in this year, in this uncertain time. There are things that we know, and the more, you're going to have to be flexible, but the more that you can lay out, the better off you're going to be for the year. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'm going to just stop talking there. But yeah, but thank you. That's a nutshell, right? And I know we could go on forever, but I'd love to hear what you all are thinking. So there. I'll turn it over to Anne.
Wow, I took 2 pages of notes.
Oh, geez.
I'm retired. I really appreciate your comments, and I really love the fact that you started out and then you came back and gave us permission that we don't have to do it all. I think that especially, you know, we go to a workshop, we go to a meeting, we hear about this, we hear about that, and we think, oh, I can do that. And then the culmination of all those little tasks becomes overwhelming, and maybe we don't do as much as we should.
Mhm.
So thank you for doing that. I think that at least for me, it gave me permission to say, I can focus and it's okay.
Mhm.
Um, we had a lot of questions that came in beforehand. My chat window is totally empty, people.
Hint,
So
hint.
if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're on a PC, I don't know where it is on a tablet, but is it on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a number of icons. One of them is chat, and you can send a question either by finding my name or Kim's finding my name, or you can send the question to everyone. And I'll continue to monitor that window. So I have a few questions, and then that were sent in with registrations, and then we have some questions. We'll see what questions come in on chat. You mentioned e-newsletters. Can you expound on e-newsletters and the type of content? You're saying that the Friends of the St. Paul Library, which is a much bigger organization than many that are online today, does it twice a month. Can you give us a little bit more guidelines, a little bit more idea about what might be in the content and frequency, considering the fact that some of the groups are smaller than the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library?
Absolutely. And I will just first start by saying this is a learning process for me all the time. You know, I'm learning right alongside all of you in this friends world here. The e-news, and we've gone back and forth a lot. This is one of the other things that I'll say is just like being able to, you know, give yourself grace with your capacity. Give yourself grace with, you might change your strategy and you might be figuring out what your strategy is over time, and that's okay too. When I started, there was an e-newsletter that was already going out. There were a number of different constituencies there. So they had done a lot of work to segment the list. And so some people would get news about, we do the Minnesota Book Awards, so they would get Book Awards news. And some people would get news about our other programs. Some people, yet another group, would get messages about fundraising. One of the things that we decided right away was, we noticed that we had all these separate constituencies, but people didn't necessarily understand we were a whole organization and all of the different ways that you could engage with our friends, and that there's overlap. Some people who are interested in the Minnesota Book Awards, they might also be interested in what the library is doing. In fact, very likely they are, and therefore might be willing to donate. So there's no reason to rule them out, let's say. So we actually combined our list, which if you are hearing about communications now, it's all about segmenting and targeting and all those things. And so I was like, guess what? We're going to combine everybody. What a great idea. And so now we worked on kind of telling people the same story. So we would have maybe at the beginning, sometimes we have an intro message from our president, Beth, that just says, hey, here's all the different ways you can engage with us. We do advocacy, we do programming, we do all these things. And then below, we would have, here are the programs coming up for a month. And I will say that is probably the heaviest content block that we have, is our upcoming programs. I give myself permission to not do an e-news if we don't have a lot coming up. I want people to look forward to opening our emails. I don't want them to say, oh God, I just got this email and there's nothing new in there and nothing of interest. So if we don't have anything coming up that next week, I say, I'm gonna bump this email to the following week. So program content is number one probably for us. But again, like I said, we're working on ways to communicate differently with people. So whether that's a message from Beth, and whether it's a library spotlight. I mean, as I talked, obviously, you know, connecting with your library and highlighting your library is one of the most important things we can do. So we try and think about whether it's highlighting a specific program they can do, or highlighting, you know, an impact story or something like that. We try to think about what that connection looks like as well. And now that we have had this, COVID world with registrations galore from a number of different programs, now we're starting to talk about how do we segment people again and start talking to people who came to our, One Book, One Minnesota program, which was Greater Minnesota, who might not be interested in St. Paul necessarily, but is interested in some of our other author programming, which is now accessible anywhere, thanks to our virtual world. We're starting to think now about how do we effectively tell the whole story of the Friends, but then also give people specifically what they might be interested in. So again, I find a couple times a month is what works in order to, for me, in order to collect content. But sometimes it might be more. When we had the advocacy campaign that I mentioned, we had an email going out every day for a week. And I had help from a different organization, so that's why that happened. But so it might vary, but once a month could be fine too.
So we have a number of questions about social media, but before we go on to those in somewhat succession, we have a question with regards to some of the content from your presentation. So can you describe the difference between the theme and the annual message in terms of communication and planning? Give us a little bit more background there so we get the definitions and the actions in our brain.
Sure, absolutely. And I recognize that that's the point where I'm like, okay, we're about out of time. I want to go fast, but have some time for questions. So I did gloss over that part. This is really my language too. I want to be really clear. I don't like a whole lot of jargon, and I don't like a whole lot of different rules. Again, what language do you want to use to describe your organization? For me, what I found helpful is saying there's an overarching message for the year. And that message is, we want people to understand libraries are about people. The themes were more, I would just say, drilled down messages, if you will, more focused messages, and ways for me as the communications person planning those different initiatives out to say, well, how am I going to talk about libraries are for people this month? And so this month it was about, I broke it into thirds because I'm not going to change my communications every month. Again, thinking about capacity and just sheer number of things you have going out. So for this third of the year, I really want to hammer home the gratitude for the people who have made this possible. So the supporters, the people who have, who founded our organization, we leaned really heavily on our 1945 library director founder, Perry Jones was her name. Turns out she was a pretty amazing woman. So we leaned really hard on her story. And so again, libraries have always been about people, Friends have been about people. So then I changed, the theme for the mid-year was going to be, okay, libraries connect people. So here's all the ways that we're connecting. You can connect to story time. You can connect to resources. You can connect to each other. This was also pre-COVID when we were going to have a big initiative about connecting people. So that's really what I mean though, is how do you take that overarching message and figure out maybe more tactical ways to get it across at different points in the year? And you can do that however makes sense for you. If you want to have multiple themes, if really maybe one message is what you have time to concentrate on, that's okay too. For me, I like the specificity. That's where I get ideas. It's harder for me to brainstorm like, what do we talk about the library this year? That is hard for me to do. But once I constrain it, frankly, that's where I start to think, oh, we could talk about this kind of connection and that kind of connection. So that's what those are just tools to do that, if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. I hope it answered the people who asked the question.
And if not, I'll just say, holler. You're always welcome to email me. I'm happy to have a Zoom coffee or discussion. Kim@thefriends.org. Holler if I can answer any more questions.
Okay, so back to social media. I think you gave us a one by saying you don't have to do it all. One of the questions was, if you're not going to do it all, which? I think you gave us a nice list. If I don't know if that's your prioritization personally, or if you feel it's a broader perspective for other people. You listed Facebook, Instagram, e-news, direct mail, print pieces. Would you say that that's maybe a template in general, or is that more because it's what you're comfortable with and or what the Friends of St. Paul Public Library have at their resources?
That's a good question. It is what works for us. Yes, I will say that. I think Facebook is a good medium for others potentially, because there's a lot. It's nice to put events on there. It's very interactive. People can, leave comments, things like that. And it's also, it's just more understood now. It's, it's more ubiquitous now, and people, our friends group, we do have a lot of older constituents, and they're much more comfortable with that as a medium rather than some of the other ones. And so I would recommend it. But again, I would do that with the caveat of maybe survey your board or survey the people you do know and see if they're actually on those mediums. It doesn't hurt to, or it's always better to ask, frankly.
Better to ask. Who knows? You might
Yeah.
find a whole group of friends that are using TikTok or something.
Exactly.
Not really. I don't think, but
I'm going to look you up on there afterwards, Anne.
I'm not. So we have a question from someone who's obviously coming from maybe a little bit bigger group, because they, what social platforms should a group of about 100 active members be using? And I'm thinking that with 100, if really the adjective is correct, 100 active members, then that means you might be able to do some division of labor. So how would you maybe give advice to that person who raised that question? Because that's a little bit more specific than maybe a lot of the other friends groups around the state.
Again, I would say if you have those active members, you have a way to communicate, ask them what they're on and what they'd prefer to use. I think Facebook could work perfectly well. Facebook, I don't know how you're, if those members are also people that are helping you with communications, or if just the people that you're talking to. But, Facebook has groups as well. You can just, you can create a group of people. So that might be a way to have them talk to each other beyond just following your page. That it could be interactive. So I'm not sure if that's something that you want to explore, and you could facilitate discussions within that group. Yeah, that's what I would say. I think Facebook can work for that too. I mean, the typical social platforms we hear, Instagram, Twitter, and things like that. I mean, it's just a matter of following you. There's not a ton of discussion within that necessarily group. So if you're looking to facilitate that group conversation, I might look at Facebook for that.
So I need to be mindful of the time, because we want to make sure we have time to break out into sessions and still come back and have Sue wrap us up. But we do have an interesting question that's sort of backwards in that, is it possible to over communicate so that your audience actually gets tired of hearing about the friends in the library?
Oh, such a good question. And if I only had the time to over communicate, that would be a problem to have. But I would say yes. And I would say it, if you're communicating about things that are no longer useful, and if you're just saying the same thing over again to people, then maybe consider not saying it one day. At the beginning of the pandemic, I imagine you all remember, everything went online. And I felt personally there was so much pressure to attend a concert, go visit the zoo virtually, do this museum, do the online coloring thing, get your kids to do the, whatever it was. There was content all over the place. I personally felt overwhelmed as a parent, as an individual, as a professional trying to do my work. And I remember thinking, we don't need to continue to produce all of these things. People have lots of places that they're getting content. So I would say, keep in mind, what do you have that is of benefit to people? What do you have that people want? If it's of benefit to them, if it's new and unique and only you can provide it, then absolutely communicate that. And I wouldn't be afraid of doing that, even if it means sending a couple emails a week. We were afraid to do that at first, you know, with the campaign, sending in one email every day. That was a lot for us, and we were afraid. And of course you get some unsubscribes, but again, because it was something that people were really interested in, and it was a new way to engage, and they thought, oh gosh, I want to be a part of that. Most people weren't mad at us, you know, and as evidenced by the unsubscribe or subscribe. So I would say, if you've got something of benefit, go ahead and communicate. Just don't feel like you have to talk all the time.
So Kim has generously given us her email, Kim, K-I-M, at thefriends with an S, .org. So feel free, if your question didn't get answered, to shoot her an email. We've had a couple of questions about recruiting members who have the right kind of talents and how best to approach fundraising campaigns. I'm not going to toss those off to you. I think that each of those is a big enough question in and of itself. I'm going to throw it back to Sue Grove and her programming committee, and maybe those are topics sufficiently large enough that we might want to consider for future workshops. So at this point, I'm going to let David take back the reins as our techno master and break us into breakout sessions.
Okay, a little intro before that. So, but thank you, Kim, and thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Oh, Anne, oh, you are a master at the question and answer. But as she said, this is going to be the time for our breakout groups. And David has assigned you a spot randomly, and you will benefit from at least one MALF board member in your group, and we will help stoke the conversation as needed. We'll have just under 15 minutes to discuss the prompt I mentioned earlier. And the prompt is, what's the best idea you've heard today? And that's going to be tough choosing just one. And how might you apply or adapt it to your community setting? And then we'll have a few minutes afterwards to reconvene and share what percolated to the top in each breakout group. So I guess, David, take us away. Okay, we thought maybe the most efficient way to report out would just be to go down the line. So Anne, group one.
Well, we had a great mixture of outstate with Marshall and Rochester represented. I guess it's greater Minnesota. Sorry, I've been in Minnesota too long. And some metrocentric people. So good group. Of the things that people thought from today's meeting, today's session with Kim, that they thought they could take right away and run with, was the idea of a book giveaway. Fairly easy to do, something that could get planned now in these COVID times, and then it would be a great way for getting contacts. The idea of expressing more gratitude to friends, members, and others, so writing letters or somehow letting people know that we appreciate what you do for the library and for the Friends. The idea of soliciting stories that then can be used, whether it's on Facebook or in your communication, to reinforce the importance of the library and the importance of the Friends. And then we had the idea that, you know, that Facebook is somewhat challenging to have people who both are comfortable with posting in general, but also then making sure that they have enough content to figure out that they can post on a regular basis. So those were our options for, you know, people that were ready to go home and try something.
Okay, thank you. Group two, Lynn. Lynn, are you, Lynn? Oh,
there I am. Sorry.
Okay. That's right, I couldn't see you either.
Okay, so we had a good group as well and quite wide representation. A couple of us from Selco Libraries, though, Anne from Red Wing and Northfield here. So among the best ideas that we heard about were surveying our members and others about how they would like to be communicated with. And, you know, find out if they're not Facebook users, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use Facebook. But, you know, not everybody wants to get print anymore either. So, but, you know, actually talking to people. And then also to just be aware of the fact that you can't use old ways necessarily to communicate with younger people, that we need to adapt as much as we can. We also heard that people from the idea of having that consistent messaging guide and have the quick pitch ready, because we've all had the experience, well, maybe not Anne, but because she's always ready with it. But to get, you know, when somebody asks you a question, you may very well know the answer, but you don't always have a concise and effective way to put it back out there. And the quick pitch makes that possible. Also, I personally, we have a very poor website at our friends right now. We've been trying to get it updated for about 3 years and haven't done anything. So this is a good opportunity for us to say, this is something we can focus on even during COVID. And then we also had a member who lives up north and loves her bookmobile, and she may go and start a Friends of the Bookmobile group. Let's see. Oh, and then I did want to report that this isn't necessarily something that was taken from today's presentation, but Red Wing has, the Friends have donated 10 Wi-Fi hotspots that can then be checked out from the library. And this is to meet the needs of people in the rural areas that don't have access to broadband. And it's been very popular. And so a great service for them to plug.
Thank you. Okay, group 3, Loretta. You're still muted. Are you having trouble there?
We can circle back to her.
Okay, Loretta, we'll give you a few minutes. So group 4, Melissa? Oh.
Yeah, there were 2 of us, Kathy and I. And Kathy's is the president of the Friends of the Anoka County Library. And it was really fun to hear that they're doing some of the things that were mentioned. And the one thing that first off, they are paying, the Friends are paying for hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots for the library right now. The one thing that they were doing is they did a email newsletter that went out through Facebook, and it's available if someone comes in the library and asks for it. And then because of Give to the Max, they ended up having over $2,000 in contributions come in. Yay, isn't that wonderful? You know, and I shared with her, I've been working with libraries throughout the state, and we're hearing that people are donating, people are giving, people are giving. And so that was interesting. Kathy and their group are getting ready to put together a end of year donation letter, and they gleaned from this workshop the word invest, the idea of investing in the library, and being grateful, and also the belief in the library as a central part of the community. So, oh, and also this was great with the appeal letter. Okay, depending on how much money comes in, they might consider looking at a lawn sign if you give over X amount of dollars. Wouldn't that be fun? To do a zippy yard sign for the Anoka Friends, and over whatever donation. They haven't quite worked that out, but that was one idea Kathy got.
Well, I just thought of that now. So the board.
Yay!
That's great. Okay, Loretta.
Can you hear me now?
Was that it, Melissa? Sorry.
Yeah, the only other thing I did want to share that for myself, the one thing I gleaned, and Kathy and I talked about it, is that spreadsheet. I thought that spreadsheet with that communication plan and the months, and then I recommended with friends, every month they could see how much came in. They could have an area where how much they gave to the library, how much they donated, how much came in as gifts, how much in kind volunteer time they had, and keep that on one big spreadsheet like that. Now, maybe everybody in the world's doing it, but I thought that was real clever. I want to do it for my life.
Yeah, I need to do it for mine, but okay, all right. Back to group 3, Loretta.
Okay, finally, you can hear me now. We had a great group as well. We talked a lot. Some of the things that really responded to us was the fact that this is a perfect time now to be creating a communication plan for the year. And we looked at that, and the fact that giving ourselves permission to focus on what we can do on social media and what works for us, because we had different size groups and different, some people were capable of doing more or had more volunteers than others did. So, you have to do what's right for your group, which is, I think that's something that really responded. And we talked about picking an audience for your messaging too, using different language for people, and when you're looking at your audience, drawing them in, and your existing audience, how to keep them involved. And also, I was really impressed with something that was really impressive to me is the impact stories. How on like our group has a Facebook page, but it's not, we don't have a lot of followers. We don't have a lot of connection with people. But one way that we can do it is through sharing some impact stories on Facebook. I think that would be a wonderful way.
Okay, thank you. So group 5 was me with 2 people from Red Wing. We had third person who obviously had technical difficulties, so she disappeared. But Red Wing, their group has kind of gone inactive since COVID, but they are now inspired to start up after the first of the year. And we kind of brainstormed some ideas, and they start, right now, just getting some people to help post on Facebook. And even if it's a book discussion or a book recommendation, and the whole thing of like and share. And then they have a new member, so they're going to contact her and get regenerated for January. And then one quick one that Austin has done just recently, which is comparable to the publicity with the yard sign, only, and Melissa knows this one because she participated. They did a yard sign with a flock of flamingos, and it took off and went all over Austin. I mean, the flamingos that appear, and within 24 hours, they fly off somewhere else to someone else's with the Friends of the Library sign. This is what you get when you have young people now in charge. They have energy, and it was hilarious. But again, it got a lot of play around town. So,
Sue, how much did you make?
I don't know. I haven't asked him yet.
Interesting.
But it was much
Clever.
more. It was almost too successful. They almost lost their minds. But luckily the weather held and the ground didn't freeze, because they were able to continue on later than they thought. So
Because you could also pay not to have them.
Yep, exactly. Get your insurance so you wouldn't be flocked.
Yeah.
But it was hilarious. So anyway, group 6, Janet.
I like or you could pay not to have it. That was pretty funny. And Kathy is with my group, Kathy Petron. She's our president, and go Kathy. I mean, that sign idea is great. Lucy with our group mentioned bumper stickers, which would be kind of a cool idea too. We had 6 of us, 1 from Moorhead, Fergus Falls, Penn Lake, which is Hennepin County, and 2 from Duluth, and me from Anoka County. we had a variety of things. The younger audience, what programs are geared for someone who's a young adult more than children, or, you know, someone who's in their 40s, and that could help bring in the younger people into our group. Yard signs, everyone had yard signs down. Ask what the users want was a big one. How to communicate and focus on Penn Lake and work with librarians. We talked about that. Using email addresses rather than mail outs. I guess Duluth has been doing a lot of mail outs. And so, and then of course the signs and the bumper stickers and the giveaways. And then we talked about the technology and that's involved in the communication, especially Facebook. And and the responses to those who do communicate to your friends, to be sure to respond, to give thank you notes, which I think are so important, or just to answer questions that they might have on a timely basis. We had a really good discussion. We ran out of time. So, so it was good.
Thank you. And finally, Kathy, group 7.
We had a group of 4, and we also thought surveys of existing members and yard signs were good ideas. And somebody also mentioned having a donor button on Facebook or the website. We spent a little time talking about just how MALF interacts with their group. And one thing that came out is that it was pretty unanimous that they preferred the online webinars to the in-person workshops, that sometimes the travel to and from a workshop for an hour and a half made it less desirable than if they could just join in their pajamas or whatever. So I thought maybe that would be helpful to the program committee.
Thank you. Thank you. That really is good to hear. And as usual with our friends groups, there's not a dearth of conversation. We all love our libraries and got some great ideas from Kim, and we'll be getting the highlights from Kim. It'll come out in an email that I'll talk about in a little bit. But anyway, so before we end up for the day, I want to recap a few highlights from our programming year. And well, we sorely miss networking and learning with friends in person. However, the one big silver lining of pivoting to the virtual space is that you can now enjoy the programs after the fact. So you can go back and check this one out in the near future. And I'd also like to recommend our first foray into the digital space. And it was a training seminar by Mary Jo Wimmer about how to cultivate friends leadership. People that'll be willing to do that, both in these strange COVID times and beyond that, because any conversation, we're always talking about how do we recruit leaders. So that's a very good webinar that's out there. And then a few months ago, in lieu of our traditional annual conference, MALF hosted a half-day mini conference on Zoom, and we had the New York Times best-selling author and really vocal library lover, William Kent Kruger, as our MC. And it was our Saturday splash. And we offered the friends a splash of this and a splash of that. And you can watch all segments on our YouTube. And it includes, the same day included presentations by each of the 2020 Evie Nordley finalists, and a video montage spotlighting the accomplishments of this year's stellar class of Standout Friends. So that was really fun. So our tech manager, David, has dropped the corresponding YouTube details into the chat. Oops, and there's a nice visual. We'll also email you links as part of our follow-up email to today's registrants. So I recognize some of those people. Okay, so what's next? Largely, it's up to you. So be on the lookout for the email I just mentioned, and it'll include details about a short SurveyMonkey survey. And we're eager to learn not just what you thought of today's session, but what you'd like to see as focus areas for 2021. And we've already had a couple ideas in the Q&A. MALF is a volunteer and member-driven organization, and we do go through the surveys and take your suggestions to heart when we're doing our programming. In fact, today's actually came as a suggestion from one of our last surveys. So, and now is the perfect time for me to remind you to renew your MALF membership. MALF's membership year is equal to the calendar year, and current members can expect a renewal letter to hit your mailboxes pretty soon, maybe later this week. And you don't necessarily have to wait for your letter. And by the way, not only library friends groups can join, but individuals can join. And you're going to check the chat. I think it's in there now or coming. There's a link to a Google form to update and verify your contact details and pay the dues online. And that was part of our discussion today too. Dues start at just $10 a year, and it would help us continue our programming. I actually did the online renewal and paid this weekend, and it's very easy. So visit our website, mnlibraryfriends.org, for a refresher on the benefits you have as a member and other resources available through MALF. And the top of that list, again, is our Evie Nordley Award. And believe it or not, coming up in January, the nomination time will open for that. So be thinking of the projects that you did, initiated and conducted in 2020. Excuse me, I'm getting a frog. Any of those projects are eligible for consideration for the next Evie Nordley Award. And if you need ideas for upcoming projects, go to the website. We're eager to learn also what resilient friends across the state have been up to throughout this most trying years. And the Stand Up for Standout Friends is also going to be open starting in January, but you have till June to get those nominations in. So before we sign off, I want to give a huge thank you to David, our tech manager. None of this would happen without all his work, not only during the program, but ahead of the program. So thank you, David. And again, thank you to everybody for joining us today for the Friendly Tips, Effective Friends Marketing. And I'll say in advance from the entire MALF board, I hope you have happy holidays and a great day.